Welcome to part 3 of the Ogroid Myrmidon Masterclass. Today we're going to paint the face. These are the colors I used in this episode. If you're painting along, don't forget to post your progress pictures on Instagram under the hashtag Traverian Masterclass and follow my Instagram for regular updates on this project. This is basically an extension of last week's video, so let's jump right in this time. Just like with the rest of the skin in the previous video, I'm covering the base mix of Mephiston Red and Pink Horror with Orange Brown. Notice again how I'm creating an initial gradient with more transparent layers, for example on the cheeks. I really want some of the pink base color to shine through here. I'm leaving some of the deeper recesses untouched. See how I'm pushing away pigments from the areas I want to leave darker, as I'm applying a second layer to make sure the parts I want to be more consistently orange are covered in an opaque layer. As a first highlight color, I'm mixing the orange brown with ice yellow, and I'm putting down opaque layers on the areas that are exposed to light, like the cheekbones and the back of the nose. And I'm putting in a layer on the edge of the jaw to define an outline of the shape. Also, I'm highlighting the ears. The upper lip is also an exposed area, and I'm also defining the structures on the forehead. I'm mixing in a lot more ice yellow, and I'm putting in more opaque, bright layers to make the defining process a bit faster. But while I like how bright the face got, using a color so close to white gives an overall desaturated result and also might be a bit too steep at this point. So I'm using yellow to bring back saturation and equalize the face and the highlights a bit more, while making it brighter at the same time. Since I want the face to overall be brighter, that was quite fitting. I'm covering most of what I painted before, but since the ice yellow is a really intense base, it still keeps everything very bright. On top of this, I'm reapplying the ice yellow a bit more localized and careful, leaving the lower layer to show. Now that the value step isn't so bright anymore, this looks more like what we want. Remember, when you don't like something, analyze why you don't like it and do something to counter it. Don't be afraid to repaint certain areas if you don't like them. It's usually worth it. At this point, I'm also adding the white of the eyes. It's okay to use the ice yellow for this, because at this scale using pure white would look weird anyway, and we also need to reserve white for the reflection dot. See how I'm leaving out a darker line around the eyeball. I do the same thing for the other eye. In this shot, you see that I'm keeping the highlights on the face brighter, slightly to the right. This makes the face overall a bit more interesting than a pure zenithal light. Second layer of ice yellow to make sure we have equal coverage. Just like with the skin volumes, we need to make sure that everything that would catch light gets a proper definition. For example, I'm putting in a line next to the horn because that whole area would be bright. We don't want strange dark rings around our shapes like we would get with shading with washes. Next, I'm defining all outline shapes where I want the contrast to be higher against more shaded areas. Putting in highlights more precisely now after the initial layers were more of a sketching nature. Wherever I need a bit of a transitional color, I'm adding back a bit of the yellow. And I keep on gradually building the highlights. Adding tiny spots of pure ice yellow to max out the contrast. This stage involves a bit of back and forth as I'm equalizing the values a bit. Here I wanted to up the overall brightness more and leave the shades for the very deep recesses, which also darkens the areas that are too bright. It usually takes me a bit of this back and forth to find the right balance between overall brightness, contrast, and the level of smoothness I want. I'm mixing a purple color from Mephiston Red and Dark Sea Blue to treat the lower part of the mouth and the lips. I'm letting the color spill over to the base of the beard hair, which adds color variation and contrast to this area. This needed a few layers until the lip was covered completely. Again, I'm mixing colors I need from the colors I was already using. Usually we don't need a lot of premix colors. I always like to keep the color count that I'm using on miniatures low. It draws everything together, and that way you also don't have to buy more premix colors than you actually need. I'm adding ice yellow to mix a highlight color. Remember what I said about global highlighting colors in the last video. I'm doing the same here. With the first highlight step, I'm covering most of the upper edge of the lip. Adding a second layer makes sure we have good coverage. Adding more ice yellow to the mix and covering less area. Applying the highlights more localized in the middle of the lip to build a combination area for the reflection. It really helps to have a good brush to do this. You can find links to the brushes I'm using in the description of the video. And there are also affiliate links that give me a bit of revenue if you use them. So consider using the links for hobby gear that you need to buy anyway. At this point, I'm also adding a line on the lower edge of the lip, as there will be light catching on there too, and I'm adding small vertical lines to mimic small wrinkles on the lips. Mixing in yet a bit more ice yellow, I'm putting in the brightest highlight, offset a bit to the right. Remember, this is the overall light situation that I used on the face. Here I'm defining the upper lip to be overall equally bright, and I'm also applying the purple mix to the underside of this area to build the upper lip part of the mouth. And I'm also painting the teeth and the tongue in the same color. Or at least it doesn't matter if the teeth catch some of this color. Since I'm keeping with the theme of the last video, using as little different colors as possible, I'm mixing a brown from Mephiston Red, orange brown and black to get a base color for the teeth. In the same vein, I'm mixing a bit of a dirty grey from orange brown, black and ice yellow to use as a base color for the beard. For the parts on the side of the face, I decided to paint single hairs, or rather strains of hairs, because could you really see single hairs in this scale? And I'll have them extend into the skin color a bit to add some extra detail. To add a bit more liveliness to the beard, I'm adding more orange brown to the mix, and I'm adding streaks of this color to the hair strains. I'm also treating the hair below the chin the same way. For the highlights, again, I'm adding ice yellow and I start to define streaks of hair, leaving the recesses dark. I'm gradually adding more ice yellow to the mix and I'm covering less and less area. I'm adding some white for the last highlights. Using some of the darker gray and adding more black, I'm mixing a shadow color to add back some definition, because I felt like the beard was overall too flat now. As a last step, wherever I lost some brightness, I'm adding back a few brighter strands of hair and some more shading for these lower areas. Going back to the teeth, I'm remixing the base brown I used for them and then add some ice yellow for the highlights. I'm dabbing on highlights. The teeth are so small that there's not much use to try to blend. I just start wider at the top of the teeth and then add smaller dots towards the lower areas. And of course I'm covering less area with each highlight layer. A last highlight with pure ice yellow. Mixing a brighter pink from Mephiston red and ice yellow to add some basic highlights to the tongue. It really doesn't need more, just a tiny bit of light to distinguish it from the rest of the mouth. Then it's time to add pupils to the eyes. I'm prepping a bit of black and make sure my brush is leaving very thin lines only by testing it on my thumb. Then I'm dragging vertical lines across the eyeball because I want the pupils to be more slit shaped, almost like a cat's, to underline the beast-like nature of this guy. Again, a good brush with a nice tip and a good reservoir helps a lot here. I'm also testing the shape my brush tip creates on my thumbnail for the reflex dot before I apply it. Be careful here and make sure these reflections are on the same side on both eyes. I want to shade the cheeks a bit more and at the same time make them more lively. So using Mephiston Red, I'm glazing in a few layers. And I'm using a bit of a stippling brush motion to make the central areas more intense. Some areas I want to darken more than others, so I'm adding a bit of black to the Mephiston Red, and I'm selectively stippling in opaque dots of paint. Especially under the eyebrows, I wanted a deeper dark red tone, but also directly under the cheeks where we would get a darker shadow naturally. As always, pushing the pigments into the darker area and switching back to Mephiston Red where I wanted the red areas to be wider. Like in the skin tone video, this is a good example for adapting the opacity of the paint and the way to apply the paint to the situation at hand. I keep on gradually building the saturation, shadows, and smoothness, which means I'll go back and forth between the appropriate ways to apply a paint. Whenever I want to blend the orange parts and the red parts together again, I mix a midtone. You can see how I'm adding back some orange brown into the mix. Another thing I'm doing is to increase the contrast on the nasolabial folds. So I'm putting in very confined, opaque dots of paint there. I'm also reinforcing some other shadows like above the nose and a bit more under the cheekbones. Some parts of the face needed a bit of cleanup, so mixing ice yellow with a bit of orange brown again, I was putting in solid layers of color around wrinkles and facial features, especially on the forehead, but also on other parts. I'm also using a bit of Mephiston Red to paint the underside of the nose to add a shadow and some color variation, and I'm mixing a slightly brighter shade of pink to paint in a thin line as a bounce light with a tiny dot of pure ice yellow as a culmination dot reflection. Putting in some finishing touches by stippling on a few pixels, extending some highlights further down on the facial wrinkles to smooth out transitions and to define the mouth. I also decided to detail the painted on beard hair extensions a bit more, which gives us a bit of a more realistic look than just painting what is sculpted. This way we can get a lot finer detail. And that's about it. If this video was helpful, leave a like, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe and activate notifications via the bell so you get notified when the next part is up. If you want to help me keep doing these videos, consider supporting the channel on Patreon like these guys have. Share the videos on Facebook, Reddit, and wherever you think people will find the videos helpful. And if you want to do me an extra favor, watch one of my other videos like the one suggested on screen in a second. See you in part 4.